Good morning, everyone. And just a quick word again about the Global Reading Network. It is a network built to facilitate bilateral discussion between USAID and implementing partners and other stakeholders. And with this session, we hope to enable more networking among colleagues. And we will try to be having these sessions every 3 months.
Thank you, Susan. All right, to continue this conversation for us, I'm going to turn it over to Cassandra Scarpino and Michelle Newman from USAID Center for Education, and they're going to tell you a little bit about today's webinar. Over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone. My name is Cassandra Scarpino. I'm a Foundational Skills Advisor at USAID Center for Education, and I'm very happy to be joining you all today in this networking event. As was mentioned, today we will be sharing with you about USAID Pre-Primary Framework, All Children Learning, which was released earlier last year. The framework describes 3 principles linked to quality pre-primary education, and today we're going to be focusing on one of the 3 principles, equity and inclusion. I look forward to hearing from you about your experiences with inclusive pre-primary education during the breakout rooms, and really much looking forward to learning and chatting more about how we can all better support quality, inclusive pre-primary education, as well as getting to know you. Next slide, please. So just to provide a bit of a background, let's look at the priorities for education as identified in the 2018 USAID education policy, as this is a guiding document for us in our approach to education programming from the pre-primary to the higher education level. So these priorities include prioritizing country ownership and systems, promoting equity and inclusion, and working in partnership and leveraging resources. And finally, focusing on improving learning outcomes across the education continuum. And by education continuum, I mean education systems from the pre-primary through the higher education level. The policy designates pre-primary education as a key area of focus. At USAID, we define pre-primary education as any group-based, organized instruction serving children, generally between the ages of 3 and 6, or those few years before their entry into primary education. And programs can be school-based, center-based, community-based, and include between 1 and 3 years of instruction. There might be a variety of schedule, models, and settings from context to context. But the one defining characteristic of quality pre-primary education is a focus on early learning. A question that we might have, although this might be an easy question to answer to this group, is why does the policy include pre-primary education? And it does so because providing quality pre-primary education to all, especially for the most marginalized and vulnerable children, education systems can minimize equity gaps in learning outcomes, while also increasing the number of students who reach grade level benchmarks in primary and secondary education, and also completing formal schoolings. Next slide, please. So this is the USAID Pre-Primary Framework, All Children Learning. It was launched last year in June. And this framework details an ideal education system that focuses on key consideration for young learners at different levels. And these 3 levels are at the school or learning environment space level, at the family, home, and community level, and at the system strengthening level. And each level includes critical components and factors that enable all pre-primary learners to build strong foundation for lifelong learning. And all these take in consideration specific context needs, resources, and challenges. The framework also provides us a guidance on how to expand access to quality services for children from the most marginalized and vulnerable groups, with a particular attention to children with disabilities and children that are living in crisis and conflict context. I mentioned before that the framework has 3 principles. Today, we will be focusing on the equity and inclusion principle, but you can also see the other 2s. Next slide, thank you. So we also mentioned before the USAID education policy priorities promote equity and inclusion in order to ensure the education programming reaches all children, including the most marginalized and vulnerable. But what does this mean in practice? The policy, as well as the implementation guidance, tell us that there are several factors that contribute to inequities within the education system, including at the pre-primary level. And these factors include poverty, location, religion, gender, ethnicity, and disability. And when we refer to the most marginalized, those in vulnerable situations, we're talking about a very diverse group of people. And these might include persons with disabilities, people living in and affected by crises and conflicts, LGBTQI+ people, people living in rural contexts, as well as linguistic minorities, people with a low socioeconomic status, those of a minority race, religion, gender, or ethnicity, indigenous population, and other groups that are marginalized to specific contextual factors. In addition to the policy, the implementation guidance as well highlights how consideration for equity and inclusion are critical to support partners' country education system in order to achieve equitable, sustainable, and quality learning and education outcomes. So now let's take a minute. We have this guidance from these two very important documents for us at USAID, but who are the most marginalized and vulnerable children in your communities? Let's take a minute to think about that. And you're very much welcome to share some of your initial thoughts in the chat, although we will also have some time in the breakout rooms to discuss about who are the most marginalized and vulnerable children in our programming. Next slide, please. So looking again at the framework, in order for children in marginalized and vulnerable situations to have increased access to quality education, and by quality education, I mean an education service that is safe, relevant, and that promotes social well-being, we must apply equity and inclusion principle across different levels. Again, the three levels that we described before are the learning environment level, the family, home, and community level, and the system level. And just looking at the learning environment level, we can describe a quality pre-primary education program as being a program that is inclusive and based on principle of universal design for learning, or UDL. Integrating UDL principle means that programs include multiple means of engagement, so the children and learner can interact with the curriculum content, and that the curriculum content is representative of diversity, different identities, different backgrounds. It also encourages children to engage and express what they are learning in different ways. UDL principle, though, should not only be adopted at the learning environment level, but they should also be integrated at every level and part of the pre-primary subsector. So UDL principle should be included, integrated also in teacher preparation and training, in the design of the physical environment, as well as the development of materials and instruction. I will pass it on now to my colleague, Michelle Newman, so she can share additional thoughts on how adopting equity and inclusion principle might look like in a program. Michelle, on to you.
Thanks, Cassandra. I'm Michelle Newman. I'm the Playful Learning and Innovation Fellow at the Center for Education at USAID. So we thought that it might be helpful to give an example of how equity and inclusion have been addressed at different levels of the framework. And so the example we wanted to share was from Rwanda, from the Homes and Communities activity. So while this activity prioritizes all the needs of all young learners, it has a particular focus on young children with disabilities and their families. And the ways that it is supporting the families is by creating these support networks, and there are more than 700 parent peer support networks through this activity. In addition, there are multidisciplinary teams that administer the Child Functioning Module questionnaire for children from ages 4 to 9. And that's a way that they can sort of identify children with special needs and refer them to specialized services as needed. And another interesting and important facet of this activity is that it's being administered and implemented in partnership with the Ministries of Education, health, and gender. So it has that multi-sectoral approach. Next slide, please. Thanks. So pulling all of this together, what does quality inclusive pre-primary education look like? Now, obviously, this is going to vary a lot based on context, and there are many different pathways to achieve quality in this space, but we wanted to highlight a few characteristics of what are quality inclusive pre-primary classrooms. So first, we have children who interact with a wide range of play and learning materials that foster their language, literacy, numeracy, and social emotional development. It creates a nurturing space for children to explore and develop in interaction with their environment. And that includes age-appropriate and contextually appropriate books and materials in different formats, including Braille, audiobooks, and sign language. We also need teachers and facilitators who are trained on play-based inclusive approaches so that they can really maximize the opportunities for all learners. Assessments need to be developmentally appropriate, informative, and used to inform instruction. At the same time, professionals need to be trained so that they can connect children who need additional support to relevant referral and intervention pathways. And finally, there needs to be many different means of engagement, as Cassandra alluded to earlier, so that different learners can learn in different ways without lowering any learning outcomes. So the idea is to have high standards and multiple approaches to achieving them. Next, thank you. So to conclude, we wanted to share a few resources, and we, of course, would love to hear from you about the resources that either you have developed or used in your work that you find helpful to increase access to quality pre-primary education for all young learners. So in particular, we wanted to draw your attention to the Disability Inclusive Pre-Primary Education Landscape Review, which provides staff and partners with an understanding of how disability inclusive pre-primary looks like across different contexts, including those affected by crisis and conflict. So it does have a focus on low and middle income countries. And one key takeaway is that there is quite a large gap in information when it comes to inclusive pre-primary education in low and middle income countries. However, this resource does document some promising trends and practices related to assessment, professional development, and promising practices with regard to programming. So that is one resource we wanted to highlight. We will put other relevant resources in the chat. And again, we look forward to you sharing the resources that you have found helpful as well. And now we want to hear from you. So I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie to explain how we're going to join the breakout rooms. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, so we are going to have 8 breakout rooms today, and you'll be selecting your own breakout room. So again, room 1 is going to be for those of you who choose to speak Spanish in the breakout session, although the facilitators are bilingual. The second breakout room will be for French, same. And then the other breakout rooms are open for selection in English. Closed captioning should also be available in English. Please mute while you are not talking. And then this is a networking session, so we highly encourage you to trade contact information, set up follow-ups if you feel comfortable doing so. I will give you a 1-minute warning when the breakout sessions are going to close. And most of all, I hope you have fun and have great discussion. All right, everyone, welcome back. Give everyone a minute to settle back into the main room. Hope you all had wonderful discussions in your breakout sessions. I know I did. Would anyone like to volunteer to highlight or share from your group? I'd love to hear from a few of you. If you'd like to just raise your hand or speak up. Ruth, I believe it is. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was very surprised that even though we were speaking the same language and we were from different countries, we have similar problems related to disabilities and the coverage of preschool. So I was very interested in that. Even though we are from different contexts, we need to solve the same issues. So that was something that was very important for me.
Thank you. Alyssa.
Yes, it was also exciting that we had people from a few different countries. We had sort of a nice Spanglish conversation going on in my room. So yeah, so we had some members from UNICEF, USAID, and I think Georgetown. I'm forgetting the acronym. I know it's IDP. It's oh my gosh.
Is it Inclusive Development Partners?
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
Development Partners. Yes, thank you. Yes, that's it. And I do know Inclusive Development Partners. I was having a brain freeze. But so we talked, I think the key pieces that we talked about were teacher training, that folks are doing, a lot of teacher training, working closely with government and the importance of doing that. When we're thinking of more equity and inclusion, and engaging with families and community, the other critical piece. Just a piece that came up was around what barriers we're facing in the context we work. And there were a couple of mentions of just elections and political will and the disruptions that are faced because of elections. And so the last question we had, and we kind of got into it, I think it would have been great even to go further, was, how do we deal with is it kind of just reactive when there's an election and we have maybe a changeover of staff, and that there is you have to just have that relationship with whoever is there. The pre-primary sections maybe tend to be very understaffed, and that we have to keep developing that relationship with them. And that's a big part of what we have to do. I think, that's kind of a lot of advocacy. I think everyone is sort of doing a lot of advocacy in the pre-primary space, especially around equity and inclusion and awareness raising of the importance of pre-primary.
Thank you. Wale?
Yeah, thank you. So we have, rich contributions across country, Malawi, Rwanda, Kenya, and we talked about barriers like disability, and then of course the key issues around pre-primary that needs to be explored, issues around transition, preparedness, language, and the issue of data collection, which all points to inclusion. These are key issues when you address inclusion. And transition is, again, important in terms of who sets the definition for quality pre-primary education, the teachers or the parents. Some parents have issues with that word, play. And so when you talk about play, parents don't really want to see overt play in the classroom. And so luckily we have Peggy from Lego Foundation, who says, Lego Foundation is now redefining the word play. They're moving away from play to engagement. So this means children being self-sustaining in their activity. So that's a key one that we noted. And again, a couple of good practices in terms of compelling issue around reforms in the national government. Should the government begin to think about embracing the private sector? Most of the poor quality pre-primary startups in the private setting, should the government begin to think about reforms in terms of embracing them and then introducing quality assurance, and then doing that, you expand access at that level of education. So these are the key things I think I can recall, and now coming from Group 5. Thank you.
Great. Sounds like an incredibly rich conversation. There was a lot there. Susan, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Yes, we had a great range of contexts and professions representatives, very also rich conversation, lots of similar themes. I'll point out, highlight three. Also the power of play, and folks who in there very much in the programs they're working in the classrooms they're working, seeing the difference that introducing play, and I like this notion of engagement, the difference it's really made. A lot of conversation just about communication and really getting better information out to families and parents and community, and doing effective outreach. Because often it's just the information just isn't available to those who need it. And one last notion, which we didn't get a chance to talk through too much, but it's one I think it's perhaps it's obvious, but really powerful. And I think it was Aline who mentioned this, and just how important early childhood education is for really, it's an entry point for learners who, for whatever reason, may be faced with stigma, be it geographic stigma, be it resource-based stigma, be it because of a disability, and how important early childhood as an entry point to begin to overcome that stigma from the beginning, how important that really is. And it's, again, we didn't get a chance to talk about it much, but I think it's something I would like to have a chance to talk through more. That's it, Carrie.
Great, thank you. I'll summarize what my group spoke about briefly. We talked a lot about barriers to pre-primary access, including refugee populations and nomadic populations, any population where they're maybe not in one consistent school for a certain amount of time. And that linked to a discussion primarily about data collection and monitoring and accountability for learning outcomes. In that if a child does not stay in the same school for a period of time, it is very difficult to collect the data about those learning outcomes. And then we also discussed a lot of the cross-sectionality of pre-primary education, especially with the health sector, not only for students that have possible disabilities, but for basic nutrition and health outcomes as well. Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for this really, really quality discussion. I would like to redirect your attention to the shared screen. If you would like to find out more and have more access to events and information like this, I highly encourage you to join up for the Global Reading Network. You can scan the QR code there, or you can find us on EduLinks. And please join us at our next networking session. Next slide. Next slide, please, David. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's session and the great conversation. Please feel free to connect with each other on LinkedIn, share your contact information in the chat, and let this not be the end to our great conversations. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thank you.